as we've been moving through the 12 hours. When Revelisa set up these topics, she was using the topics from the youth education program. And that's not usually what I've ever had happen in the church program. So I've never done a talk on zeal before in 30 years.
Wow.
So that was kind of interesting, fun, and different. And one of the things I thought I'd share with you is that, first of all, Claire, you don't have to sit there if you don't want. Oh, okay, good. All right, I didn't realize that I hadn't given her that information. So one of the things I realized as I was looking at the topic is that when Charles Fillmore wrote the 12 Powers of Man, actually he didn't. He did a series of sermons that were each on one of the powers, and then his second wife, Cora, took his various sermons and made them into books. So, for what that's worth. So, when Charles did that, he was drawing on the work of his teacher, Emma Curtis Hopkins, and she had taken for each of the lessons, the 12 lessons that take one from being someone who kind of understands maybe that God exists, sort of, to being a powerful healer, living in the transcendence of being. That's her 12 lessons. That's what they're about. And each one, she realized, had qualities that were, as she put it, the doctrine of Jesus being made clear through various signs in the world around us. So lesson 1 is the number 1, and the number 1 stands for unity and oneness and wholeness. And it also stands for the ego, the I, the sense of my being. So that was Judas Iscariot, living from the intellect, the ego, the I, lesson 1. And as she went through, she identified each of the lessons with one of the 12 apostles. And one of those apostles, well, 3 of them are named Simon. Simon Peter, Simon the son of Thaddeus, and then Simon the Zealot. And as Charles was meditating on that lesson, Simon the Zealot, he was realizing that there is both the kind of implications that we tend to think of and connotations that we think of the word zealot, but there were also these very, very positive things, the zeal and energy. And I don't know how many times you've heard the quote, the Charles Fillmore quote this month, but I know it was at least once because it links his title. I fairly sizzle with the zeal and enthusiasm, Charles Fillmore. So as he is realizing that we can all be fervently passionate about something, and that when we are fervently passionate about something, it comes together in ways that we didn't even imagine before. There's more of that divine energy work in us, through us, and as us. He was being aware that the term zealot had probably been misunderstood. So I want to spend some time with that. The Greek word that is translated as zealot is actually that, zealotes. And this is a person who is so passionately committed to something that you're not going to pull them off that path no matter what. Right? That's how committed they are. And we talk sometimes about someone zealously guarding their secrets, right? Or their treasures. They are committed. There is no way that anything is going to happen there. So it's possible that Simon the Zealot was zealous for something in particular. And some scholars say, well, yes, he was clearly zealous for Jesus' teachings. he was passionately committed to Jesus' teachings, and he went into the world. We have evidence that he was probably in Persia. We know that he was probably in Northern Africa for a while. He went into the world with this passionate commitment to Jesus' teachings. And that led to, as with all of the apostles, him not being on the planet very long. However, there was also something else going on at the time that Jesus and the apostles were walking around on the planet. And that is that Rome was running Israel. Rome, the province of Judea, which is now Palestine and Israel, was under the Roman Empire. And in the Roman Empire, they were very, very open. You could worship whoever you wanted to, and the emperor. And these hard-headed Jews were not going to worship the emperor. And it was a constant tension. And you can see bits and pieces of it as you read the gospel stories. You know, there's this coin, we're supposed to pay this tax to Rome and Roman coin. And it says, well, whose picture on it? Is it God or is it the emperor? Well, if it's the emperor, give it back to the emperor, not us. Well, there's a whole tradition around that because coins were invented by temples to pay the temple tax with sacred money. So yeah, he was saying you give the Jerusalem temple money, and you give, you know, Rome whatever their money is. It's meaningless to us, it's worthless to us, because the only thing that matters to us is the temple. Yeah. And then he managed to have a fish for some fish and find all the necessary coins in that. So it really did mean nothing. It just was there when they needed it, which is part of what Unity teaches. Is it's always there when we need it, even if we don't really understand why or how it could be needed. So, under these circumstances, there were certain people in the Jewish tradition, mostly men in late adolescence and 20s, who said, we know how it should be and we should not be under Rome. I'd like to point out that the American founding fathers were mostly in their early 20s during the time of the Revolution. Only a couple that were middle-aged or older. Isn't that interesting? But quite apart from that, this group of young men were known as Zealots, capital Z, Zealot. And they are held responsible for the destruction of Jerusalem after Jesus and the apostles left the area, because they kept badgering the Romans, and the Romans finally brought in extra centurions and extra soldiers to squash this. And then during the siege of Jerusalem, they started battling people who weren't on their side. So they were actually killing other Jewish people. And it ultimately led to the destruction of Jerusalem in approximately 70. So Zealot got a pretty bad name. And so when we say Simon the Zealot, how could Jesus have one of those guys in these disciples when what he's doing is he's teaching love your neighbor and turn the other cheek? So it was this constant conflict, contrast, it was cognitive dissonance to have Simon the Zealot be listed among Jesus' disciples. So you can see that Charles had a bit of a thing he had to work with when he was writing about zeal, because there was this conflict. Is it this or is it that? Was Simon representing the passionate fervor that moves us and carries us through difficult times and into great accomplishments? Or was Simon representing the people who were constantly fighting against the system to the point where they were actually pushing each other? Well, if we look at the world today, what do we see? we see zeal in both directions. It's the same sense of passion and fervor. But for some, it's against something, and for some, it's for something. And for some, it's for something that the rest of the world thinks is against something. And so it's this really, really powerful presence in our world today that is in fact the basis for what so many people are calling divisive. It's people's zeal for what they believe must be how we live and how we work together. So that suggests there needs to be something behind the zeal, right? Because if the zeal is for what I have intellectually figured out and have emotional issues around, guess what? It's the Zealots of Jerusalem. It's not the passionate zeal commitment to the doctrines that Jesus. So again and again, we are invited to look at what is the source of our energy, of our action, of our choice. Is it coming from what I have figured out, what I have been taught, what the media is telling me? Oh well. Or is it coming from that deep knowing that I know in unity, as I accept that the wisdom of the divine is always here now. And if I go into the silence, be still, I can find that wisdom and that guidance and that beingness that then I can go, wow, yes, and be zealously, passionately, fervently committed to experiencing in my world. Does that make sense? Yeah. So zeal in itself is not useful necessarily. It's where is it coming that matters. The young men of Jerusalem were saying, this is what we've been taught. This is what our culture says, and they're not doing it, and we have to defeat them. They had no idea that Rome was as big as it was. They just saw a few guarded soldiers hanging out in Jerusalem and thought that was the Romans. No idea the extent of the capacity of that which they were fighting. But they were fervent, passionately committed to the teachings of Moses as presented by the temple, the priests, that they were taught, not that their heart knows. So I like to think that what Simon the Zealot is about for us is how we can begin to let go of what we were taught, what we've been figuring out, what we think has to be so, and go inside and discover what it is that is truly trying to happen. What is the light? What is the love? What is the beauty, the wisdom, all these divine qualities? What are they being and expressing that I can experience and express more fully in this moment? Basically, I have to let go of the upper left quadrant and allow the right and left rear brain come together in the silence. Let go of that part in me that wants to operate on fear and anger and upset. And find that place where peace is expressing in me, and fervently, passionately be committed to being that and experiencing that. And I think that's what Hilma was inviting us to go as he helped us to see that Simon, the zealous one, is a sign, an image, an example of how we can shift from what we were taught we had to be, and the world had to what the world really is, and who we truly are. Because in the stories about Simon, as he was working with the Persians, he was actually doing exactly that. He was inviting them to go inside and to find that deeper wisdom, to find that peace, and to act on it. Unfortunately, the military can't do that. But for us, in this world, as we do this more and more, as we allow that deeper wisdom, that deeper understanding, that peace, that wisdom, that joy to be who we are and what we are experiencing and expressing in the world, we are actually contributing to the world being transformed into what our heart is always known. We are. Jesus and those 12 men changed the story of this man. That's 13. But they were totally committed. They were zealous, passionate, fervent, committed to living and being what we call the creator of the story in their lives, through their lives, and sharing them in the world by being, and when invited, teaching, but really only when invited. And you can see that in the Acts of the Apostles. Oh my goodness. Now, for those of you who read Mandino, you know that Paul was actually the marketing arm of those 13 men. He wasn't one of them. He was separate. He never met Jesus. The closest we got was he was in the crowd trying Stephen, who was the first martyr to the faith. And Stephen wasn't even one of the disciples. He was one of the 72, not one of the 12. Yeah, because there were followers, right? There's always followers and hangers on, groupies and all of this. And Stephen was one of those. And Stephen had the gall. This is the guy who was St. Stephen's Day, the day after Christmas. He had the gall to stand up in front of the Sanhedrin and say, "You're pretending to follow Moses' law, but we're living Moses' law." And they said, "Oh, we don't want to hear that." So he was martyred. And Paul was part of the process of martyring Stephen. And then he went on to Damascus, where he was going to martyr more people. And then he had the experience of being knocked off his horse, made blind, in the light of truth. And he became zealously, passionately, fervently committed to sharing that truth. And writing all this. That actually there's more words in Paul's letters than there are in the gospel. So people ask me sometimes, when I say that I teach these teachings, they say, "Well, are you Christian or Paulian?" Because they are slightly different, because Paul never met Jesus. It was all his understanding based on his own experience, his inner experience. So as we go, we don't have to be telling everyone, "You need to do it this way." That's what the Zealots did. You need to be living this way. We need everyone to be living like this. No. We are passionate, fervent, committed to be the light, the wisdom, the peace, the joy in every moment. Now, Zumema came up today and shared that it's been a little hard for her to find that last. And I'm going to share that some of it is because everyone's been talking about it the last few weeks. Sometimes when an idea is put in our face for a while, our old training comes in and says, I don't think so. That can't really, right? So we get to look at that old way we were taught to be. And that's huge. That's a big part of being part of the unity, is when the stuff that isn't heavenly, isn't divine, isn't wonderful comes up, we stop and look at it and we choose. Am I going to continue along that of those thoughts and those feelings, the shoulds, the oughts, the have to's, the must, right? The gotta, and all these defined toxic words, should, ought, must, gotta, have. Because they're the ones that pull us into the distress, that pull us into being depressed or not well. Believe it or not, it's true. So every time I find myself saying, oh, this should be like that, I should have done that. Whoops, I should have done so. That's toxic behavior. I need to stop that. All right, so now I get to go with that. If I'm doing this for my shoulds, what is it that I'm really being drawn to experience? What is the love and the joy and the peace calling me to be experiencing? I've learned that most of the time, it has nothing to do with what the culture wants me. Sometimes it does, and then we're all there. But most of the time it doesn't. So when I needed the body to heal, and the world wanted me to show up at places at 9 in the morning, I would say, I'm sorry, I'm not available before 11, ever. And I would let the body take however long it took to get ready to get up. And that might be before dawn, and that might be 10:30, right? It would be somewhere in there, and just let it be. Because the divine and the body are in sync when I'm not pushing the body to do what I've been told I should do. So I would relax and allow. And sometimes I would just stay in bed until I couldn't stand staying. And I learned actually that that was a good way to undo the shoulds. If I would do whatever I was doing until I couldn't stand to do it anymore, then I wasn't doing it from the shoulds, right? I was changing because it was coming from inside. It's time to want something else. Rather than doing things by a clock or by some schedules or someone else's expectations, I would keep on doing it, stand to do it anymore. And often in the evening, I still do that. I do whatever I'm doing until the body's going, I don't think so. Oh, it's time. Weird. And usually that's about the time you get ready. And I don't follow the same routine every day. I am zealously, passionately committed to being present in this moment now. So I may get up on the side of the bed, I may put something on, I may take something off, I may go and brush my teeth first, I may not do that for a couple of hours. I mean, sometimes I go off and work in the garden before I even get to the bathroom. Because I'm allowing that inner process to guide my actions. I'm not being a zealot about the schedule. I'm being zealous about the inner guidance guiding. Little bit, passionate, fervent, committed to having divine guidance, even not the cultural. Strongly recommend. Really, it got me through a terminal diagnosis, got me out of it. And it is guided steps every step. And all the books, and all the classes, and all the businesses, and the radio show, and the churches, and everything else have happened out of that way of thinking. Not because I got to do it, but because, wow, look at the snakes. I'm ready to do that. So I invite you to make a new commitment. Now that you've spent a month exploring zeal, see where your zeal is coming from. See where that passion is. Move with it. Invite that inner knowing to guide you in the next step. And hopefully it will guide you here. Because here is where we get support for experiencing that way of being. Yes?
Yes.
Thank you very much.